Hi, thank you guys so much for coming out and creating a major fire hazard on the 10th floor of the Strand that feels perfectly apropos to this book. It looks like people could sit on the floor here if people wanted to come sit on the floor. I don't want to spend the whole event worrying that you're all cramped and standing and your high heels hurt, so please make yourselves as comfortable as you possibly can. So I'm so excited to be introducing this book that I'm holding upside down, but that you can see right side up on the screen behind me. Can most people see the screen? Yes? Okay, cool. So this book is a collaboration. Molly Young was born and raised in San Francisco, but she has lived in New York for 10 years. She's a contributing writer at the New York Times Magazine. She has written features for GQ, Elle, New York Magazine, N+1, and others, and authored columns for the New York Times Book Review and the New York Times. Her favorite New York City smell is hot sidewalk nuts. Joana Avillez is miraculously both from and still living in New York. The longest she has been away from the city is 4 months. Her drawing and illustrated stories have appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, New York Magazine, Zeit Magazine, Apartamento, and many other places. She illustrated Lena Dunham's memoir, Not That Kind of Girl, and her favorite New York City smell is the fish market, which maybe we can ask her about later. So DCT, I have no idea how this clicker works. Yes, there they are. Looking, I don't know if you guys noticed, but we have dressed to match the book today. Nothing is an accident. DCT is inspired by this book by William Steig, CDB, which is a book for children that is all spelled out with rebuses. So this is one. Can someone read this out loud? I hear people murmuring to themselves. Yes, I'm too old for you. William Steig himself was old when he began making children's books. I think that he was 61 when he began, and it's this is the second. This was the first children's book that Steig made, and I think he made this one in 1968, and then he made this one 15 years. Ooh, whoa. He made this one maybe 15 years later. It's called CDC, and it follows the same format. So this one says, oh, CDC, XLR18, it's exhilarating. He, before beginning to make children's books, was, among many other things, a New Yorker cover artist. He was also himself a New Yorker. He was born in Brooklyn and raised in the Bronx. He made about 117 covers for The New Yorker and over 2,000 drawings for the inside of the magazine. And so it's very fitting to have this homage to his work done in the form of a book that is entirely focused on New York City, DCT, in other words. This is the first page of the book. I'm not going to go through all of them, don't worry, like not one by one. You guys can read it later, but I'm going to go through a number of them. This is one of my favorite spreads. It's probably hard to see the letters from the way back, but on the left it just says FN, and on the right it says L for heaven and hell, which to me feel like such perfect encapsulations of what one might most love and hate about New York. And I want to ask you guys what you most love and hate about New York. What are the things that are F and L?
Hello. Thanks for coming to our event and not to Bill Nye's. Bill Nye has all the chairs. I think my favorite and least favorite, my least favorite would be that I seem not to be able to leave. 4 months is unacceptable. And my favorite would be all of the people who don't mind standing in really crowded rooms.
Hi, I'm Molly. I think my favorite and least favorite are both just the extremes of subway experiences. Like, it is heavenly to walk into like a sparkling empty car.
Although afterwards we also noted that sometimes
an empty car is a bad thing.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And then also obviously just the hell of being like sandwiched in and utterly dehumanized on your morning commute is the opposite of that.
One thing that I love about the way that you've remade this book. Oh, sorry, I thought I was on a different slide. I'm gonna go this one. One thing that I love about about this is like it feels incredibly, while it's a callback to a book that was published in 1968, it also feels incredibly 2018 in its use of these acronyms, which like this shorthand is something that you see all over texting and the internet. I am late, I am busy, maybe not things that you would say to a mugger, but like definitely things that you say to friends all the time. Did you find this taking over your life as you were working on it? Did you constantly try and make acronyms?
I did start dreaming in them.
Well, making acronyms is, am I holding this right? Is very difficult. Molly is the foremost acronym maker in New York and beyond, post Steig. They're really hard to do. When we were making the book, I would sometimes like hope to think of one, and they're impossible. So to dream an acronym would be too challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the fun things about the book was coming up with situations that feel both of the moment and also sort of timeless and eternal, and also situations that were both specific to New York, but then also specific to anyone living in a city or anyone with an urban experience.
Yeah. And were you intentionally thinking about how this sort of resonated with an internet lingo of like LOL and Lilas and things like that? Or were you not really thinking about that and more about the 1968 book?
More about the 1960. So the thing about the 1968 book is that William Steig, as far as anyone can tell, invented this kind of phonetic puzzle system, and he did 2 books in it, and then nobody else continued that. So in my mind, it was like if somebody had published a crossword puzzle once or twice, and then nobody had ever continued the fun and games with that form. And it just seemed like a neat opportunity to do that.
Which actually, I skipped over this slide too quickly. The thing I forgot to say when I was introducing you, Molly, is that you are a crossword puzzle maker as well. How was this different or similar than making crossword puzzles?
And I think it taps into the same. What I love about crossword puzzles is there's this very right, like it's a natural human inclination to solve mysteries. Or when you're a kid, your whole life is solving the mysteries of existence and figuring out what things mean and how things go together and how things relate to each other. And a crossword puzzle is like a very diminished, portable version of that, where you're solving little mysteries, and there's a very discrete interval between being confused and then being not confused, and that's very satisfying. So I think that feeling is like what I wanted to give in this book.
Yeah. I want to go back to this one. Can you guys help me read this one? All at once, or with raised hands? I am a native, yes. And speaking of being natives, speaking of being, what a coincidence that slide is there, leads me to my next question. One of you is a native New Yorker. One of you has lived here for 10 years. I wonder how you think those things have influenced your view of the city, and what has driven you to make this ode to it.
I mean, if something, it had to resonate, I think, with both of us. So, I mean, for me, I think we wanted it to be as Molly said, we wanted it to be about New York, but also about like any city. It had to be something that even if you didn't live here, you could get into the mindset of New Yorker, like the New Yorker who's getting mugged and saying, I'm busy, I can't like look in my wallet right now. Maybe you could take this.
Well, talk about when you were a kid and your people watching.
Oh, well, I was telling Molly recently about how I feel like my love for people watching sort of started in a stroller, and I consider people watching to be almost like the way someone would think about, like a birder. Someone who, like if you see a really exciting person on the street, I have like a massive thrill. And there's so many incredible people on the street in New York. Maybe that's my favorite thing about New York, is that people really, when they leave their apartment, they're really presenting themselves. They're not getting into a car. They're really giving you a full biography of who they are. I'm kind of on a tangent
at all. When you were working on this, were you walking around the street and looking for people to draw?
I think so, and also just I'm always drawing the city, and whenever I do manage to leave, I'm drawing other places too. So I was using all of these like previous people that I've drawn and trying to distill them into this impression of New York. Yeah.
What about you as a 10-year New Yorker, which I think makes you a pretty legitimate New Yorker?
Ish. I mean, I in general spend a lot of time walking around the city, and when we started coming up with the idea for this book, I would specifically go on like 8-mile walks and, no podcast, nothing in my ears, bottle of water, just like watching for things that seemed interesting or that seemed typical, or, the little like the little microaggressions and the little kind of behaviors that people adopt. Especially New York is interesting because I think it is very much when people go out into the street, they're definitely like presenting a version of themselves, but there's also something like really unperformative about it. Like we were talking about this earlier, but you can walk down the street in New York crying and nobody will like offer you a Kleenex or like ask you what's wrong. Like there's a certain amount of like
which is very freeing.
That's how we all got here, by the way. Sobbed our way to the Strand.
Right, like everybody kind of has their own privacy bubble that is respected. So it's very easy to be anonymous in this giant city. And I think that seems to give people freedom to just be fully themselves in public in a way that a lot of people are only in private.
What about when you're looking as carefully as both of you are doing to make this book? Do people notice that you're looking at them in a different kind of way?
No.
No, sometimes I think if you're drawing in public, people are very interested and they'll come up to you and try. I mean, if there's someone painting on the sidewalk, you might like go behind them to see what they're making. So drawing kind of draws attention, but I'm pretty furtive.
Do you draw on the street?
Yeah, I do. And I was lamenting my iPhone because I think I used to, if I saw someone who I thought was really funny or I don't know, just an interaction, I would draw it. And now I feel like I reach for my phone and it's just...
to take a photo?
Yeah, and it's...
To draw it later or just because you know need to draw it?
Well, almost. And I don't want that to take the place of the drawing.
Yeah.
But...
This clicker is really overexcited. We'll get there. Next one. Oh, I put this up because I remember you telling me that you were walking around in order to find inspiration, and that you were walking around Chinatown specifically. So I noticed the bucket of eels.
Yes.
And it reminded me of like my own. I grew up near Chinatown, so like I remember just like watching someone grab an eel. An eel had like fallen out of the bucket and was like trying to get away down a New York City sidewalk, and this guy just like picked it up by its tail and like whipped it. And his head exploded everywhere. Anyway, so I definitely recognized that. And I recognized the guy with a cat on his head. Who else here has seen the guy with a cat on his head? Yeah.
Kind of upsetting.
What other things did you see walking around the city that you put into the book specifically, or in the scene, or in general?
Oh my God! I mean, I think so many things. We were trying to. When we were coming up with it, we had, Molly had a lot of code already written, and we were trying to find, the right drawing to go with each text. And so I think then, as we were amassing tons of, I guess they're kind of cartoons. I think then we were thinking, well, what else is another aspect of the city? Like we have a lot of people, we have, like a mouse on the sidewalk. We need to think about all different levels of the city. So that's where I think wildlife came in.
Molly, do you want to talk about this image?
Sure. This one's very personal.
Maybe we should have someone try. Maybe we should have people try and read this first, in decency. Yes.
Correct. So I used to live across from an apartment building, and in each of the units there were people who would walk around naked, like independently of each other, just like a lot of nude people all the time. And so I would, be sitting by the window in my tiny one-bedroom apartment, like drinking a smoothie in the morning and watching just 4 naked people on different levels getting ready for their day. And there was the unit directly across from me contained a young couple, a woman and a man, and they also had a lot of sex, in front of the window with no drapes or anything like that. So sometimes I would happen to catch them in the act, and I would, watch for a minute or two, just check in. And then, so some time passed, and eventually the woman half was walking around. I think she had just gotten out of the shower or something. Not that I was paying too close attention. And I noticed that she had a little bump, like she had a baby bump. And I was like, oh, that's funny. Like I kind of saw that whole thing happen. And then some months passed, and I got to see her getting bigger and bigger. And then there were a few days when the lights were off and they weren't there. And then the lights went back on, and they were there again, and now there was a baby. And I felt like I had just seen this like whole cycle of life, like very innocent, like an innocent Edenic display in front of me. So yeah.
I love that. You're both young women. Do you think that like being young women moving through New York changes the way that you move through it, and also changes the way that you've chosen to represent it?
I mean, I'm sure it does, but when we were actually an interesting like inside dope piece of information is that when we were talking to editors about the book, there were sort of like one camp of editors that were really interested in, they liked the idea, but they really wanted it to be more specific to like, well, what is your experience as like a young millennial woman?
They wanted it to be a book about girls.
Yeah, like a millennial woman's view of New York. We just like weren't interested in that because it's more, I feel like it's more interesting.
I don't even know how, I mean, it wouldn't be very fun for coding to have to make it only about, I don't know, through that lens. It had to be a much bigger world.
Yeah, that makes sense. Although one thing that's interesting is the book has like, it's a slim hardcover with pictures. It looks like a children's book, but then, I mean, these are inappropriate. No, these are very sweet, but like, but who is the intended audience for the book?
I mean, we feel that it's okay if a child, Lila,
sees a naked body.
Lila looks at it, and I think often people's favorite books are the ones that leave the greatest impressions, or the ones that when you're little that you accidentally see. But I think it has to be for a very playful adult, or a very mature child. I think it's really for everybody, but it's not. It's only for Lila. She's really good.
Let me go to the next slide and see. Oh, that's kind of what I wanted to ask here too. Although I love, so do you guys want to read this one?
This is also an eye exam.
Can you guys even see what the letters say here? Deviant behavior. Yeah. I love that this was the most deviant thing that you could think of. How did you get here?
Actually, I think we had so many different. I mean, some codes found their drawing immediately, and then I think this one was one that we moved around.
What were other deviant things you considered? Do you still remember?
What were the other candidates?
Well, we wanted to have Fran in the book somewhere, and we thought that she wouldn't mind being called a deviant. That was, I think, how that got matched.
I want to go back to, you were talking about books that leave a lasting impression on you, and clearly CDB is a book that left a really lasting impression on both of you. Can you tell us a little bit about the origin of this project, like how it came to be, how you discovered you both loved that book? Yeah, well, Molly.
Sure, I'll take this one.
Sorry.
Well, we had this kind of interesting parallel inheritance situation where when I was a little kid, my father, who is in the second row, you want to wave, Dad? There he is. My father introduced me to CDB, and it was kind of like the artifact that got me interested in words and puzzles. And then across the country, unbeknownst to me, Joanna's father had also introduced her to Steig, and it was one of the things that ignited your love of illustration.
Yeah, I was obsessed with William Steig, read all of his books with my dad. I don't know if my mom can confirm, but I think that my dad was like very much the William Steig person, and I also had CDB, and I think that I never, became really good at writing or solving any codes. But yeah, so anyway, so we met in Providence, Rhode Island. some years later.
And then
We met through someone who we each dated sequentially.
Joanna was first. I feel like you deserve the credit for that.
And he's out of the picture.
We wish him the best.
did you dedicate the book to him?
No, but everyone asks. The book is dedicated to our dads. So that's how we knew each other. So we were always kind of eyeing each other in Rhode Island and then in New York, but eyeing with a lot of intrigue.
Mm-hmm. Like a Betty and Veronica situation.
And do you remember the conversation that led to this, or was it a series of conversations?
The conversation was very brief. It was Molly saw an Instagram picture of a William Steig book that Joanna posted, and I emailed you and was like, "You like him too?"
Cool. And then we went on a date. Molly got food poisoning.
Yep.
And 2 months later, we were making a book proposal.
Awesome. I will talk about this in a second, but I wanted to ask you what surprising things you have learned about each other by collaborating with each other.
I feel like everything I suspected about Molly is true.
I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Like, the way I felt about you was like when you see an item of clothing in a store window, and you just know immediately that item of clothing would look really good on you.
It's the nicest thing.
And I just saw you, and I was like, I feel like we do good things together.
And I feel like our, not to just say how great you are, but working with you was like very, neither of us, I think, felt embarrassed. We were very like open. I feel like I could say anything to you and you would know exactly like where my brain was going with that idea. We had a very exciting moment during one of our brainstorming sessions where we were trying to come up with ideas, and you wrote something and I drew something at the same time, and it was exactly the same thing. I feel like we were very, I feel that you could anticipate something that would be really fun for me, and I was trying to come up with stuff that would be fun for you.
Did you guys do a lot of working on it together in the same space at the same time?
I mean, not the actual like sitting and penciling and then inking and then cutting out and moving all the drawings. But we would meet very frequently, and then we had copious Google Docs that melded.
Mm-hmm. Copious Google Docs. There was a I want to ask, well, I'll ask you about this in a second. There is a real timeless quality to the way you guys have depicted New York in this book, which is so difficult to capture because New York, it has all of these iconic things that you have drawn, but also, as you know, having been here 10 years, as you know, growing up here, it's also constantly shifting and changing. I wanted to know a bit about more about that timeless quality and also about why you've divided it up into seasons, because there is one way in which the book moves through time. It's that it's separated by winter, fall, spring, summer.
Well, I think we felt that at first we were thinking maybe there'd be one protagonist, which seemed too, it seemed too closed off. And then actually I think it was our wonderful editor, William Hayward. Will, who I think that Will suggested it, and I think that it works really well because New York is extreme in so many ways. Like you guys are all sardined here, and one of those ways, the weather. Winter is horrible. Summer is horrible. Every season is an extreme. It's not like Los Angeles, which is always temperate and perfect and sunny. Every season is very character building. I think that was how we arranged it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like a way that a lot of New Yorkers arrange the city mentally in their minds. You always have to be aware of your temperature and how it's not ideal and how you could be making it ideal.
Mm-hmm. And timelessness, that's so kind of you to say. But I think for the drawings, because the writing has to be an equal balance to the drawing, even though in terms of real estate there's a lot more drawing. I mean, I love the illustrator of Stuart Little, Garth Williams, and I think even looking at children's books that have a lot of text and how they divided up illustrations, it'd be vignettes and then spreads. I think I was thinking a little bit like that. Like, even though this is not really about timelessness, but I think that Garth Williams' illustrations are so incredible and timeless.
I think timelessness does go hand in hand with children's books. So something that like imprints itself on your memory and can exist. And they're made to be timeless intentionally. So you can read it and then give it to your child to read one day, and they can read it in the same way.
Right, and then even then when you open the book again, because I feel like this is a book that you could just like keep opening, but that you would find things that were really funny to you. I mean, from the time we finished the book to then when we got it, I opened it, it had been quite a bit of time, and I actually really was laughing, like reading it, because I didn't even remember some of the things that we had made in it, and all the like little details. There's like a lot of Easter eggs. And
is there an Easter egg in this page?
Well, the person holding the shopping bag and the beret is here tonight. That's a personal Easter egg, Arthur. I think, the ultimate Easter egg is also finding the meaning of the
Easter egg.
Yeah.
But that's why we all came to hear you give away all the secrets.
Right. I mean, I guess Easter. I mean, even like, it's not like an Easter egg, but things that I find amusing, like dogs and shoes, that kind of thing. Or I don't know, like when it does, like when there is like a blizzard, you do see people skiing in the city. Where
you see people skiing down the sidewalk?
Cross country.
Really? I've never seen that before.
I grew up in the now defunct fish market, and anything went there.
Sorry. It is organized by seasons, but it seemed fitting to go straight from winter to summer, as that is what we are doing. Can you guys read this one? Oh, the humidity.
So excited. Maybe because you guys are feeling a little humid right now.
This is what's next, now that it's finally nice out. You guys were telling me, so there's an answer key in the back of the book, and that was something that you went back and forth on a lot in terms of whether or not to include it. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So in William Steig's two books, the first does not contain an answer key, and the second does contain an answer key. So this was a topic of discussion, and we kind of workshopped the idea with different people, and it turned out that the question of whether to include an answer key or not like broke down on gender lines pretty consistently. Yes?
Men did not think the answers should be in the book, and women, for the most part, did. And the fact that we are women and that we included one is just coincidental. But it would have been nice not to have an answer key, because maybe we would have become really big on Reddit, and people would be arguing and trying to find the meaning. But I think there's some promise of sanity if you can flip to the back and get the answer. And you'll probably forget it, so.
You can, it's timeless.
Yeah, it's timeless.
30 years from now, you'll have no idea what the answer is. So this is this clicker is mine was on. This covers one spread, and then when you turn the page, you find out that strange yellow object on the far left is actually the end of this woman's hat, and then it goes all the way to the letter Q. And on this spread, you just have cursing. Can you talk about how you worked in letters as a visual element onto the pages?
I think that because I was drawing it, I really also saw the letters as being a very visual part of it. Luckily, we have a fabulous designer, Teddy, who's also here. I'm just shouting everybody out. But
the rest of the evening, we're just going to say all your names one by one.
But I like the idea that that the drawing is not totally impervious to the text. And I think even with like the previous one, it's 4 pages, it's all drawing, and then at the end it just says Q. And it's sort of like a math equation, I think. Like there's some, like if you kind of, it works in your mind very well, in my mind. Yeah. But yeah.
And one of the things that you told me about Molly when I first met her, Joanna, was that she was puzzle-minded, which I really loved as a designation for someone. Can you tell us a bit about your puzzle mind, and also like what you discovered in terms of which phonemes will and won't work, what you couldn't do. This was one of my favorite of your puzzles in the book. Come on, clicker. This right-hand one says Ellis Island, and the left-hand one says Alexander Hamilton.
Very impressive.
Very impressive. When I was emailing you guys about this event, I kept trying to like make cool things like this, and it was so hard. I mean, first of all, you can't make anything plural really easily, because if you add an S to it, it gets read as S. What else?
Half the alphabet's basically off limits.
Yeah, there's there's phonemes that can't be created. So like is it a soft G? G? Soft G you can't make. SH, like sh sound, is impossible. There's like 30 common sounds that just simply cannot be constructed using these letters.
Did you break this down really mathematically in terms of being like, these are the phonemes I can use and these are the words that'll fit into that?
Oh, yes. I mean, I basically just created an endless Google Doc with phonemes and then, put them together like a Rubik's Cube.
Cool. So you weren't having the frustration of working in the opposite sense of like, I really want to be able to describe this, but I can't say that word.
I mean, that was a fun part, just kind of like wiggling through that maze.
Yeah. Do you remember any specific examples of like a workaround that you were able to get to of something you wanted to be able to express?
I mean, I think that's kind of that's why you need the drawing, is because even on its own, you might not ever figure out that says Ellis Island. So yeah. There was probably a lot of things that we tried everything.
These are some of your sketchbook pages. So this is just
our brain dribble. Just like trying to come up with different like situations. This is one of our infamous pan-quotidian brainstorming sessions. No, I'm just kidding.
Did you learn anything surprising about each other? Slightly more like seeing each other at your limits of like pushing your brain and stress and trying to make this book come together? Like tics that either of you have in terms of what happens when you get stuck on a puzzle?
You're trying to start a fight up here?
Start a fight.
I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean, it's like yeah. Not really.
No, Molly's a total pleasure. So there's no. I think that you always answer things like and do things a little bit faster than me.
Well, thank you.
I'm always catching up.
Okay. And this was a sketch that you showed me when I came over of the original ice cream and then how it wound up on the mouse's head. Can you talk a bit more about your process when you're drawing? How do these things come to be for you?
I mean, I think I was really trying to think of like the balance of like how many pages were full pages and how many were like spots and how many were vignettes. But yeah, that's a really exquisite, just brain drop. I think that's just from our like little maquette of the book when we were laying it out and we were trying to organize the pages. So the process would be like, pencil, and then I like to kind of just draw straight away with pen so that it doesn't look too belabored.
This is a strip that you did about your father for a Design magazine, and he was an inspiration for you in terms of becoming a cartoonist and an illustrator. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I also included
we
page.
were including this because...
sorry. Not the end yet. Almost though.
This is a piece I did about my dad and our relationship through drawing, and in it is just a reference to one of Steig's books, The Rotten Island, and
you said this was a game that you guys played together, right?
Yeah, we would, imagine that we were on this rotten island, and we would fantasize about all the horrible things we had to eat, and come up with monsters of increasing horror. So Steig is very inspiring.
This one on the right says, "S arty, S tedious." Which is one thing your book is definitely not. It's so fun and alive. And it's also a city in which it's harder and harder to be a young artist and a young writer. And I wonder if you guys can talk a little bit about making it here.
Well, I'm I think a really unhelpful example because I'm from here and I feel very cozy in it. So I'm not sure.
Just like sheer stubbornness and force of will.
I think this is my last slide. Oh no, it's this one. I was wondering if there were Easter eggs in here or stories behind this gem spread that you could tell us.
This was just coming up with, actually you had a really great anecdote when we were looking at this about in New York, you'll see people like carrying, a sofa on their head, and no one probably offers to help or cares or anything. And when, sorry if I'm revealing about you, but you were, Nadja did escape New York and lived in Paris for a while, and you were, I think you were carrying.
When I moved back, I had to mail something. I had to mail some of my stuff at the post office, and it was heavy, so I put it on my head. And everybody stared at me when I was walking down the street, because this was evidently a very strange way of carrying a heavy box. And I was like, oh, like there's such a code of behavior on the streets in Paris. And then when I got back, shortly after, I think I had gone to go buy lobsters in Chinatown to make at home, and walking through the street with live lobsters, nobody in New York stares at you at all. So that was just an interesting contrast that happened for me.
Yeah, and you're very resourceful. All the things that a push cart full of things. It's ripe for drawing. Easter eggs. I think
I think the Easter egg is just New York City is we don't think of it as a fitness obsessed city in the way that LA is maybe, but if you look around yourself on the street, there's people engaged in a wild array of exertion of all kinds, and the idea was to just capture sort of the ambient gym that is the sidewalk.
Having made this book and had to think so hard about what the iconic images are that represent New York, what the very specific images are, like the man with a cat on his head that everybody might recognize or many people might recognize, do you feel like you have learned something new about the city or come to see it in a different way?
I think afterwards I really didn't want to think about New York, actually, because I felt like I live so close to where I grew up that sometimes when I'm walking my dog I hear a sort of carnival music, like you were in the same tiny part of the world, you must leave. I felt really I felt very, I'm always very proud of New York, so I felt good and also escaping.
I just entered a pleasing kind of altered reality where I would start seeing things on the street that reminded me of things that were in the book. And it was I was in a cycle of creation and sort of witnessing, and yeah.
Oh, that's really nice. I think we have time for questions from the audience. There's a microphone being held up at the back of the room. Does anybody have
Who wants to ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Ask a question, because it's really sad when nobody does.
So you say that you've also traveled around the world. Is there any other cities that you've visited that maybe have some of the codes applicable to them as well? Or these are situations that are really just found in this city?
I'm sure all cities do. The problem is that neither of us really speak another language. So
yeah, this is untranslatable, this book. Whoops. But you could go to any city and then we could come up with, I think probably so many of the of similar situations. But
do you think they'd be similar in other cities, or do you think that there would be different situations for each city?
We could use the code for different cities, but I think that I don't know. I think that the coding also really works with New York and the kind of like brusqueness of the city.
I am busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Do you want to just pass your microphone?
Hi. I was just wondering what it was like when you, I guess, got approved or greenlit for this book, and after you made that proposal and sent it in, finding out, oh, we get to do this. What did that feel like, and what were your guys' reactions?
I hope this wasn't too hot. I think working with somebody else is so great because everything you do, like I feel like I can like talk about this book endlessly, and I'm also talking about Molly, so it doesn't feel totally self-absorbed. But I think so. There was something where when we were planning it, we got to like check in with each other. I was excited. I was just very excited to work with you.
It was also like very clear when we were meeting with different people, you know, so we put together a proposal and then we met with different people, and it was like very clear immediately who got the book and who didn't, and that made it easier to decide sort of who to work with.
And then we had to do it.
And then yeah.
Yeah.
There's a question back there.
Hi, I have two questions actually. The first one is, you've talked a lot about inspiration, and I was wondering if you could each tell us, other than the obvious inspiration you've already spoken about, what New York stories or movies or anything you've maybe thought of or were inspired by. And then the second question I had was, were there any codes or illustrations that you left out of the book? Sorry if that's an annoying question, but I was just thinking about the editing process and if there was something that maybe it was too complicated, it didn't work. That's it.
Well, I think I looked at a lot of children's books for the most part. And I think the New York Philharmonic It's the Philharmonic Gets Dressed is a really great kids book. I don't know if is anyone
familiar with
know
that?
it?
It's a children's book that contains a lot of near nudity.
Yeah.
So it did make a big impression on
And
us.
it's people getting dressed, and at the end you find out they all work and they're all musicians. So that I also read, and very much like Bemelman's like I guess they're autobiographies, but they're descriptions of living in a hotel or working in a restaurant, and they have amazing drawings in them. And the drawings are very kind of like done on the fly, and they really like capture, I don't know, like a little kind of like city moment.
Yeah, for me it's Edith Wharton and Henry James, like the New York novels, because they're so smart at observing the different kinds of behaviors that people exhibit. Like there's no one who's better at describing like a certain kind of really annoying person than Edith Wharton, or you know, a certain expression that somebody makes than Henry James. And even though those books were written like 100 years ago, I feel like when we were working on this book, I found myself kind of like replicating a lot of the same social interactions that they wrote so beautifully about.
Do you think that there's things in this book that Edith Wharton or Henry James would be, if they saw this, like, do you think that they would recognize this New York, or do you think they'd
be like, what's happened to the world?
Why are people dressed this way?
They only use one letter.
We wrote them some great books and they boiled it down to this. Should we take one more question?
I have a question. Do you find that after you guys have gone through this process, do you have a sense of closure in that you've made these illustrations, you've made these different codes, or do you feel like you could keep going forever kind of thing? Like it's an ongoing project, you're so close to it that it's just within your nature now. Does that make sense?
I'm like always busily brainstorming excuses to hang out with Joanna now that we've ended our project.
Well, I think that was actually the second part of someone else's question about what did we not use. I think there was a lot of things that we left out. But I think we could keep going. I think we would maybe do a different world. Maybe go deeper into one specific world, I think. Because you could really go, yeah. No, it would not be about exercise, but you could. I mean, the more specific you get, the more we could probably even do. I think. Yeah.
Should we end there? Is there another burning question, or should we? Oh, there are more burning questions. One more question.
What's the total canine count in the book? It's the best question because canine is like canine. I mean, that's like the only one that people really. I mean, I think an amount that you would be proud of. I think at least 100.
I mean, I think there's only one way to find out, which is to buy the book and count them. All right, should we end there? Thank you guys so much for coming.